want to, you can check that out. But with that, Jimmy, let's dive into today's chapter, which is Samwell 3. A little bit shorter of a chapter here, but still
There's a lot of good stuff here.
Stuff in it. Yeah. So Sam and Gilly have reached what appears to be Whitetree. When Sam studies the carved face of the heart tree for a moment, he admits to himself that it is not the face he and his brother saw when they started out on the ranging, nor does he remember its red eyes weeping blood. In parentheses, it has sap. It's blood. Sam prays earnestly to the old gods to protect them. He and Gilly camp in one of the wildling huts for the night, but Sam is woken by the shapes moving within. The corpse of Small Paul comes after Sam, and he tries to stab it with the obsidian dagger, but it shatters upon contact with Paul's chainmail. Despairing, Sam thrust a burning stick from the campfire into the wight's mouth, setting it on fire. Outside the hut, the wights begin to surround Gilly and her infant son after killing their horse. Thinking all is lost, a raven lands on Sam's shoulder, and suddenly thousands of ravens fly from the branches of a weirwood tree to tear the wights to pieces. The raven, perching on Sam's shoulder, speaks, telling him to go, and he and Gilly begin to run south. But without their horse, they fear they'll be overtaken by wights. Suddenly, a voice calls out, "Brother, here." From the falling snow appears a man dressed in all black, astride a great elk. When Sam reaches up from the man's bare hand, Sam notices his hand is black and cold as ice. We've made it. Cold.
Yeah, this is so good. Also, we just went through Jamie's dreams, right? And the weirwoods, and we just did the big weirwood theory on Patreon, but this is so good. I mean, the foreshadowing of the eyes bleeding on the weirwood tree is like, okay, that's different. Like that wasn't happening prior. And then we see all this magical stuff happen in this very short chapter. Humongous here. Humongous. I would like to say, I'm just getting out the gate, Matt. I'm not gonna play around with it. I think Cold Hands is Sir Dunk the Tall. Okay, that's my first assertion. My second assertion is that George is giving us the description of the hand being black and cold as ice, and then calling him Cold Hands, and the idea that it's been frostbitten to its decay. But I told you I don't agree with that. I actually think Sir Dunk the Tall's hands were burned. I think they were burned at Summerhall, and that is why his hand is black. It just so happens to look like it would be frostbitten. It's kind of a cool little play on the elements there. And then the other thing is that 100%, I think that this kind of points to the idea that Cold Hands and Bloodraven are working together. We know Cold Hands says a friend, right? Like there's a friendship there. We know Bloodraven and Dunk had a relationship at one point in the series. All the while, Dunk and Egg novellas are being written about at this time. Dunk's a massive human being. Him riding an elk would definitely work. So for me personally, I think he's Dunk the Tall.
Agree. Yeah, I 100% agree. We've talked about this at length many times. We did a Song of Ice. We did a Night of the Seven Kingdoms breakdown, right? We did a iceberg, and that was one of our theories on there. You can check that out on that iceberg theory. And I was thinking a little bit more about Cold Hands, obviously, as we're reading this chapter and we go into it. And one of the things that you and I don't think we've really discussed, and I don't see a lot of other people discuss, is like the nature of Cold Hands, right? Because it's always like, is it Benjen? It's always like anytime you see a lot of discussions online or view videos, it always comes down to who is he? Who is Cold Hands is the question. But I think there's a kind of more interesting theory when it comes to Cold Hands, and more like, what is he? Because if you look at the show version, it's Benjen, right? And he's clearly saved by the children of the forest, Bloodraven. We don't know exactly. I don't remember actually if he says like the children found me. He has like one conversation with, he has like one conversation with Bran, and then
I actually don't have much recollection.
And then he shows up and saves John, and John's like, Benjen, and then he dies. And that's it. Well,
I jettisoned it from my brain once George had in his note to his editor said it's not Benjen. I just jettisoned it from my brain. I'm like, okay.
But let's even take that it's Duncan the Tall as an example. So obviously, the theory I think for that is that Duncan gets burned at Summerhall. He goes to Castle Black because who knows? who knows? Maybe it's a prophetic thing of Bloodraven calling to him. I mean, clearly, something happens here with all these ravens, and I don't know that it's exactly just Cold Hands doing this. I think it's probably Brennan Rivers, Bloodraven, could
Oh,
be
sure.
Bran, could be future
Could be
Bran,
Bran. Yeah.
could be future Bran, and that's kind of something else we talked about is like time and how it works within that Patreon theory we just did. But you look at this, and he's almost like a wight, but he's not exactly a wight,
Yeah.
right? And I
Yeah.
think that's something that's kind of interesting because he clearly has he's sentient. He can talk, he can think, even though even if it does, even if it ends up being Benjen or, whatever, he clearly is his own person as opposed to like the wights that we see
You're
that
right.
the Night King controls, although there isn't a Night King in the books. I mean, there's the Night's King, but there's not like we see in the show that like one
Right.
White Walker figure.
Big baddie.
Totally different. Yeah, there are White Walkers, but so what's kind of different is that, right? Is that so if like the Children of the Forest did create the White Walkers, and then like the White Walkers create the wights, is this something that's kind of different? Is Cold Hands kind of different because he seems to have intelligence, he can talk, as opposed to just being like a nice zombie? Or is it more of like the nature of who creates you, right? Whereas like the White Walkers just want an army of the dead, as opposed to maybe the Children of the Forest need agents. But why aren't there more of them? Is another question. Was it some sort of like ceremony? Maybe what, like, and again, the books could be different. If we don't know 100% sure that the books, and then you go back to that, we talked about this in some of our World of Ice and Fire stuff. You go back to any of that, you and I have talked about more of the idea that the White Walkers in the books appear to be their own thing, like their own species that has existed well before, like just in like separate to the Children of the Forest. The show shows us that they created them.
Mhm.
So maybe it was like an imperfect magic, because it is possible that the Children of the Forest could still have created them as a response to the invasion of the Andals and everything. So like that could still happen, and we might learn about that in Winds of Winter. So if that is the case, then maybe this is more what they were trying to do, and they've perfected it now. And maybe the White Walkers themselves, maybe it was the first time they tried it, and if it does go something like the show, then that could be the case there.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say without the context of if there is a
Who it
driving
is.
yeah, who it is, right? Like that's the hardest point to go with. But one thing we do know in the book, right? And I kind of want to point to this is that Bloodraven, Three-Eyed Crow, whatever, is a true entity in the world that controls things, right? That is attempting
100%
to control things. So
happens right here in this chapter.
here's a question. Is Cold Hands just some random dead ranger that is being warged into by Bloodraven?
Oh, that's a very good question.
Like, is he jumping from the flock of ravens into Cold Hands, or like somehow doing both? You know what I mean? Like, that's possible.
100%, because we see Bran,
And Bran's a warg.
right?
He wargs
Bran,
into Hodor.
right? But I will say that is also kind of the difference, and that's one of those things I think that it's tough. I think that's one of the things that makes Bran different from Bloodraven,
Yeah.
because we don't know that Bloodraven can warg, and in fact, I would actually argue that Bloodraven can't warg
Okay.
unless he's warging into those ravens.
Well, who's to say that whenever you get taken into the weirwood, that isn't like part of
That's part of
the
the
package
part of
deal?
the yeah, I know exactly. You have to kind of separate the magic, because I think that's the thing that makes Bran so special is
Yeah.
that Bran is a green seer and a warg. I think that's one of the things that probably makes him uh, appear to be like, even I think will make him to be like better than Bloodraven,
Yeah.
right? Is that, oh, Bran also has this power, and so it's so just because I have the nature of everything, I feel like that's kind of the thing is like and it could be the tree itself, because what we see of Brandon Rivers in the cave seems like, oh, maybe he is being controlled by the tree and not the other way around.
Right. And
Right.
that's been a big discussion is like, three-eyed crow to blood raven, the raven, everything's up for grabs. I'm of the opinion that there's multiple entities vying for control of this timeline. I mean, that's kind of where I'm at. We talk about this a little bit in the Patreon episode, but all of it is very much present here, and none of it becomes any clearer in this chapter because Samwell is praying and hoping,
Yeah.
But there's references to all different types of gods, and the interesting thing is that whenever he finishes his prayer, you have a wight in front of you. So who's to say that the great other isn't some sort of entity, or they're being driven by an entity, some sort of cosmic horror thing, right? But you get the ravens, right? You end up getting a wight there, and then you end up getting cold hands. Now, just because and I'm going to completely contradict myself, but cold hands, who's to say that cold hands isn't being controlled by somebody else as well? But at the time, is just willing to work with Blood Raven in these ravens. Like I don't know. There's just so many things to consider, and none of it gets any clearer. And this is why George's work is so fun to talk about, because he gives you like some more evidence, but the evidence points to many different directions. So maybe gods were hearing Sam's prayers, and all of them showed up, at least in the area, right? I mean, and also we cannot ignore the fact that the weirwood is bleeding or sap, as they say, but we think it's blood. Weirwoods, anytime in a scene, anywhere, I shouldn't say bad things, weird things happen.
Yeah, no, agreed.
Totally supernatural.
Yeah, and I want to read this. This is a breakdown on them. We like to pull up the Song of Ice and Fire reread Reddit, and these are all from 9 years ago. So we're talking well before some of this stuff happened in the show.
2005.
This was 2012. So this was like right around when Game of Thrones started.
Dang.
Yeah. So this person says, first time being able to, or he says, she was. You say it was first time participating. She was better at making fires. He could never seem to get the kindling to catch. At least in the last time he tried to strike a spark off flint and steel, he managed to cut himself on his knife. Gilly bound up the gash for him, but his hand was stiff and sore, even clumsier than it had been before. He knew he should wash the wound and change the binding, but he was afraid to look at it. Besides, he was so cold that he hated taking off his gloves. So this passage nicely sums up how Sam sees himself. It's all self-loathing. He thinks he's inept, clumsy, and afraid. In reality, he's the one protecting the mother and the child, leading them south through the snow on foot. He survived the first traitorous brothers and has killed more others and wights than anyone in living memory. His father really did a number on his self-esteem. And then we're going to talk about the gods. But I do like that little passage because I think it is a big point to take away from this
great
chapter.
Characterization.
Right. Because so much of this chapter, like when you're reading, by the time you're done, you're like, oh my God, cold hands, magic, all this stuff. But there's a really good amount of Sam character development in this chapter.
Yeah. And it's also an unreliable narrator because we're supposed to believe Sam when he hates on himself. But in reality, if we look back out of his POV, we're like, dude, Sam, you're incredible. Like, you're amazing.
Sam is by far one of the best. I mean,
and he will continue to do miraculous things. I mean, I've told you, I think that he's the one who's going to end up killing Euron with the arrow through the eye. I've talked about this.
Much like what's his name in shooting Smog in
Yeah. And also Euron, Sauron, their banners is very reflective of each other, actually. And then Sam, the only thing he does somewhat okay at the Night's Watch is he shoots an arrow. He's still pretty bad at it, but it's like the one they're like, well, at least he can kind of shoot an arrow. And then his house banner is an arrow. I mean, there's a lot of stuff there. Sam is going to be, and this is why I always argue when people are like, oh, this series is nihilistic, it's depressing, there's no heroes. It's like, no, the heroes are just people you would not expect, especially when this was written in the time in fantasy. Hobbits were unexpected heroes as well. But George is going in a very different direction. This is still heroic fantasy. It's just that the hero happens to be an overweight guy whose dad hates him, which is pretty. I mean, George has said it's his right in for himself, which I think is, I don't know if George's dad hated him or anything, but like, it's kind of interesting to see. And I'm sure that this is probably therapeutic for George in some ways, but yeah, amazing characterization. And that's what I love about A Song of Ice and Fire. It always feels so balanced to me, like between the world building, between the plotting, between the characterization, like, he's able to kind of make it all work in this big melting pot of this epic that we love talking about so much.
Oh yeah, it's great. Okay, continue. I want to continue on here. So this is where it starts talking about Sam praying, right? So Sam sank to his knees. Oh gods, hear my prayer. The seven were my father's gods, but I said my words to you when I joined the watch. Help us now. I fear we might be lost. We're hungry too, and so cold. I don't know what gods I believe in now, but please, if you're there, help us. Gilly has a little son. That was all he could think to say. The dusk was deepening, the leaves of the weirwood rustling softly, waving like 1,000 blood red hands whenever
Mhm.
whether John's God heard him or not, he could say. And then the last verse, there's that song they sang, the seven gods who made us all are listening if we should call. So close your eyes, you shall not fall. They see you, little children. Just close your eyes, you shall not fall. They see you, little children. And then just before small Paul attacks, gods give me courage, Sam prayed. For once, just give me a little courage, just long enough to hear her get away. And then, given how this chapter ends, I think it's reasonable to hear which gods answered.
Well, also, how significant does this make him kneeling with John in front of the old gods? Remember back when they swore their oaths? He went with John to do that.
Yeah,
That matters. Like
it does.
maybe that is whenever the Weirwoods finally saw Samwell Tarly and said, "Oh, okay, we got something here." Right? Like
Mhm.
that plugged him into the network. I mean, dude, all of this matters. That's why when people be like, "Oh, this scene was a little bloated and stuff." It's like George is very specifically putting things in that he wants to tie back to. And Samwell even thinks about kneeling with John. We're supposed to take that as a moment to go, "Ooh, okay, there's something there. There's something here with these Weirwoods." I think it's really big. And that whole like give me courage thing is so interesting because like could you make an argument that this moment was manufactured by Bloodraven to help build courage within Sam so later on he can use him for a bigger
Well,
purpose like slaying Euron?
and think about what he's saying. Like, and I think that's one of the coolest lines, and honestly, the entire series, right?
Mhm.
Is Sam is about to be attacked by a monstrous
Mhm.
wight, like a
Yeah.
literal monster. And what he's praying for isn't to save me or defeat the enemy or any of these things. He's praying for courage. He's like, give me courage long enough for her to get away.
What a
So
hero.
I can be the distraction so they can live. Like
Yeah,
that's
dude.
totally different than that's a selfless in a
That's a
way.
hero is what
Right.
it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's like a selfless, almost sacrifice where he's like, just give me the courage to be able to sacrifice myself.
It's the Gandalf moment with the Balrog or
Yeah,
whatever.
it's so good.
Fly, you fools, right? Like,
Yeah.
get out of here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not just save her. He's like, I'll take care of her getting away, but like help me to stay strong. So
Yeah.
good. It's
It is.
so good. Like
I love Sam, dude. People always complain about Samwell chapters, but he's so important to the
no,
story, and
every Sam chapter is pure fire. They're all
it's
amazing.
awesome.
Yeah,
Dude,
they're so
he
good.
is our like we see cold hands here, right? We get the black gate. Like Samwell's such an important lens for the story, in my opinion. Also, I do believe that there's something else in this chapter with Samwell that we're supposed to take away from this.
Go ahead. Yeah.
He goes to stab small Paul with the obsidian dagger and it breaks, and the only way to kill it is with fire. And I think this is alluding to the idea that if the White Walkers are able to armor up and have some defenses, that it's not going to be as easy as just getting all the obsidian that we can and marching in and
Right.
start slashing them. We're going to need fire. Matt, who has some fire? Oh, I know. Daenerys Targaryen and her three
Mhm.
dragons. And it shows the necessity for Daenerys's dragons to play a role in the final battle. Like this is like a micro example that's going to happen on the macro
Yeah.
later whenever we have hordes and hordes of people in obsidian, but they're wearing armor. This is big. That we're supposed to very much pay attention to that piece of this.
Yeah. Well, remember too, in the show, and I think this could still happen in the books. In the show, remember, after he's done at the Citadel, he goes back to his house, like his home. And
Yeah.
he takes the
Yeah.
wildling, and his dad is like livid, right? Like, oh, some wildling.
Mhm.
And he's like, all right, see ya. And he takes his ancestral sword.
So
He,
sick.
he takes his Valyrian steel sword. I think that moment could happen in the books.
Oh
And
yeah,
then,
I
and
think
then
it can
Sam
happen
will
in the book.
also have a Valyrian steel sword.
Well, it's also a really good metaphorical example, or I should say, it's like a good metaphor comparative to like the King Arthur stories of removing the sword from the stone. But Sam's is much more of like, a meta stone in the fact that he was never able to stand up to his father and do what was right for him. But him taking that family sword, the magical sword in this example, from the mantle from his dad against his will, is the proverbial stone, right?
Yeah.
So
That is
Samwell is King Arthur.
that's also something that's kind of interesting. And we could honestly do a whole breakdown on this at some point. But like the relationship of every main character almost with their parents, because you
Oh
see,
yeah.
like you think about like, oh, with Sam's dad as a jerk and stuff like that, but we don't really get a lot of Randall Tarley. We don't see him.
We
There's
see
much,
the effect he's had on his son.
we see the effect, but it's not like the show where you actually see,
Yeah,
that character. Totally, kind of, definitely different. But in, but Tyrion goes through like the same type of a thing where he has to deal with his father. Obviously, he kills him, right? And then Ned or John thinks a lot about Ned Stark, even though Ned Stark isn't actually his dad, but there's still like that relationship there, and that's a driver. And so that's something that's just kind of interesting too about all of these players.
Yeah, and we do.
Even Daenerys, doesn't know a lot about her father, but she's obviously trying to be.
Well,
not
she's
like
super
him.
curious about Rhaegar too,
Yeah.
right? And she wants to know why her father went mad. Like that's a very hard. Like her father led to the downfall of the family. I mean, that's a very hard thing to deal with. We do see Tarley. We do see Randall Tarley is his name. Samwell's dad. I think in the later books, I think we actually end up seeing him either in Feast or Dance, if I remember correctly. Hopefully, I'm not misremembering. Someone will correct me, I'm sure, but we actually end up doing. And guess what? He's a prick. He's an asshole. Just like Samwell makes very obvious. Yeah, generational story. This is for sure. I mean, we see a generation get wiped out with Catelyn, right? Pretty rough. Her family's decimated.
Yeah, totally destroyed.
Yeah, I mean, you got Blackfish and Edmure, but Edmure is a boob, and Blackfish is somewhere. I don't know what he's doing.
Know. Yeah, he'll show up.
Yeah.
Okay. A few other points here. So then when the raven lands on his shoulder, it says, fair, far, fear. It flapped its wings and screamed along with Gilly. The wights were almost on her. He heard the dark red leaves of the weirwood rustling, whispering to one another in a tongue he did not know. Which is, we know, like the song, like the children speak and all of that stuff. So like they're clear, like it's obvious here that the weirwoods are doing something. And then, what does the raven mean? It's a bit cryptic. Also, a good question. Is it Mormont's raven? Because Mormont's now dead, right? Go, the bird said on his shoulder. Go, go, go. How much at all, if Blood Raven is controlling the events here? Is he controlling the raven's attack, or is it cold hands? Is the raven speaking, or is the raven speaking, or is it Blood Raven?
So I think it's Blood Raven. And I think he's signaling to Cold Hands, I found him. Come here. Fear, here. Maybe a little mishap with the pronunciation. I don't know. Maybe the network's got a little lag, possibly. Right. I don't know.
Yeah, and maybe the bird can only say so much, or it says says words that it thinks so. So then, of course, you get here. Brother, the shout cut through the night, through the shrieks of 1,000 ravens. Beneath the trees, a man muffled head to heels in molted blacks and grays sat astride an elk. Here, the rider called. The hood shadowed his face. It's obviously, obviously we know it's a member of the Night's Watch that this person was. Could be a random person. Could be, Blood Ray, or could be Benjen. Could be Duncan the Tall. Obviously, all the theories about it. But something else that's kind of interesting is the elk, that it's riding, and that the person is riding an elk.
Yes. So elk has a lot of symbolism back in mythology. So usually it's a mount for a king or a hero or a powerful figure. I also have, I'll come back to it after this, but for instance, the Irish elk in folklore is a legendary stag with large antlers that is sometimes depicted being ridden into battle. An Irish elk was the real animal that lived back in the Pliocene epoch. But the Danish have it, the Elks have it. It's obviously in Norse, very, very big. It also wards off evil spirits in Norse mythology. There's a lot of Norse stuff in A Song of Ice and Fire. I would say that the wights count as an evil spirit. So it's almost like a physical embodiment. Like he's actually running after these evil spirits to get them away, which is kind of interesting. And then in The Hobbit, film trilogy, Thranduil, the king of the woodland realm, rides a large elk into battle. The elk plays a significant role in the final installment of the trilogy of the Battle of the Five Armies. So there's plenty of history and mythology to back up the fact that this is very significant, and we're supposed to take it as some sort of symbolism. Matt, I have a question, and I don't know the answer to it, and I wonder if you do.
Okay.
Did Bloodraven have a brother?
Did Bloodraven? Yeah, he had a shit ton of brothers.
Okay. Could Cold Hands be one of those brothers? We think brother
possibly.
is
He's a bastard. He's a bastard of Aegon the Fourth. There's like thousands of brothers.
So hear me out. Hear me out here. We think that he's calling out to Samwell as a brother of the Night's Watch. But what if he's calling out brother to Bloodraven, who's in the Crows or the Ravens?
Oh, you're saying like it could be a bastard of.
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of thinking.
Well, it could be. I don't think we've done the math. It's not possible for. I don't think it's possible for Dunk to be a because that's one of the theories. I don't think it's possible for Dunk to be a bastard of Aegon the Fourth. I think he would.
I don't think Dunk's a Targaryen. I think it's
because he died in 184, and that's too early for too early for Dunk.
Yeah, I mean the easy answer is that Cold Hands is in fact saying brother to Samwell, and it's just a
as a brother of the Knights,
it's like a random night,
which also should go to show you that this person. Well, yeah, I guess what you're saying. Yes, that it could be Bloodraven, but that also would mean that Bloodraven still views himself as a brother of the Night's Watch, or that Cold Hands still views himself as a brother of the Night's Watch.
And if Bloodraven
would imply again more sentient than what the Whites have, which goes back to like the White Walkers and the Wights, as opposed to like whatever the heck Cold Hands is.
Dude, isn't it kind of interesting to think, because like we're talking about it almost being parasitic. Isn't it interesting that if like from this long summer that like maybe some sort of parasitic bacteria or whatever is in like the ice in the far north, like the lands of always winter, and it's infecting the corpses? You know what I mean? Like kind of like the fungus thing in Last of Us. Like, wouldn't that be interesting? Like an ice entity, okay? Like, let's just pretend that Bloodraven and the Weirwoods are like an earth elemental like force. Well, what if the ice is like has its own thing, is becoming sentient? You see what I'm saying?
I understand. And yeah, that's something else to think about too, is how because obviously it's like, well, we think about like the weirwood as like, oh, well, it could be tied to the great other and this ice god, but trees and ice don't really.
No, they're different.
Do well, right? Like what does ice and cold do to trees? It kind of causes them to die, right? I mean,
winter
doesn't necessarily kill them. Yeah, but the leaves fall off, they lose. So
maybe a little bit of power, maybe.
Yeah, maybe they're impacted by the ice.
I like it.
It certainly drains them of their power.
Hey, and if you need a fire element, entity, obviously dragons could be a part of that, or lore, or whatever else. So it's pretty sick. It's pretty cool to think about.
Yeah, or maybe the weirwoods represent like balance.
I like that too. I like that
because when is a tree at its best? It's like, well, a tree is at its best in really like spring.
A dream,
spring and summer,
perhaps.
Spring and summer is when a tree is at its best, especially like you think like a fruit tree, like that's when it's pretty. We planted apple trees in my yard. I'm looking at it right now. It's winter here. I'm in Portland. It's not super cold, but there's no apples on that tree.
What about a lemon tree, Matt?
We have a lemon tree too.
A red door.
No, we do actually have a red door. Yeah,
I knew it.
Red door is red. Yeah,
I knew it, dude. Daenerys was in Portland.
The lemon. I will tell you though, the whole lemon tree business. I mean, I live in Portland, so it's like our weather here is in the Pacific Northwest is, it's like 30 to 70, 80. That's like we don't really get into like the 20s, and we don't really get into like 100 days too often in the summer. But our lemon tree, we got to bring it inside in the winter. It's touchy. You can't just do whatever you want with it.
Can't just put it anywhere.
You cannot. If it was outside right now, it'd be dead.
See, Matt is doing actual science to prove his Assange entire theories.
I am. I am. Yeah. So yeah, again, this chapter it's a little bit on the shorter side. There's a ton of stuff to talk about, and some of this we've done
Oh,
big
it's
series
packed.
on.
It's packed.
Yeah, there's some of the stuff we've done, big episodes on and things like that. But I mean, what's your biggest takeaway from this, Jimmy?
That the gods are moving behind the scenes, and the supernatural is very real. And I think that they're behind the curtains of this. The weirwoods and the wights and all this stuff is something of a I almost want to call it a cosmic battle. We'll just call it a supernatural battle. And I think that the humans are going to find themselves in the middle of it at one point. Now, who's on whose side, we do not know, but Sam the Slayer is a hero for sure.
Yeah, agreed. I think that's the big takeaway from this chapter. I think people should have, because I know obviously a lot of first time readers, they're reading this and it's like, man, you hit this and it's like others, wildling,
Mhm.
blood
There's a
raven
lot to pay attention
tree.
to.
There's a lot of magic stuff, but to me,
Yeah.
the big underlying takeaway, at least for me this time, really was like the Sam.
Yeah.
The Sam is the person, and all this stuff's happening, and praying for courage is just so cool. I just love it.
That's our dude, man. That's our
Yeah,
dude.
awesome.